For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Good morning, brother. Hello. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for us. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Brain Rauf. He does such great work over at Check CBB. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We're going to be diving in with him about what we've been seeing in terms of the transfer portal hoopla. If there might be more guys entering in the portal, what's going to be happening with some of these guys that are out of eligibility and they're fishing around for eligibility. We're going to be talking about that and so much more. And then additionally, we're going to take a look at some of these coaching hires, which teams did a good job on that front, which teams are really building something in the transfer portal, and just the lay of the land with this game in general. We'll be chatting about that in a few minutes. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys all of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Wednesday, as man, they just keep coming with north of 2,400 guys in the transfer portal, and you just never know what's going to be happening there. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Gina_81. Keep in mind, they meet us on Matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything that is powered by Edge Boost. Over at Edge Boost, they make sure that bettors are able to get all the funds that they need when they need them, because this is not something that runs on credit or anything like that. This is an account that you're able to use for all of your gambling transactions. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize the promo code of Greg, that is GREG, you get a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit of up to $25. And now let's chat with our good friend Brian, which if you ever take a look at his Twitter/X feed at BRauf33, that's RAUF33, you'll find his kid giving a really, really nice pose in terms of all those photos. He does great work over at Check CBB. He's doing some great work over at Sleepers Media as well. And Brian, it's always great to be able to get you aboard. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me, Brian. And Brian, you are a man that I know you went to college out there in the great state of South Carolina. So how about if we do bring up the SEC? Because they were obviously the big bad wolf of what we all saw in college basketball this season. The team from the SEC won the title. They ran things in general. Just how do you take a look at the way that they've been operating over the last, we're going to call it 2 or 3 off seasons, because they really have been able to separate themselves from the rest of the pack. And even a school like South Carolina, who they were the worst team in the conference this year, even they and pretty much any other conference would have been very competitive. And I think that it's just wild to see how loaded a 16-team conference can truly be.
Yeah, pretty much every school in that conference has become almost a destination in the transfer portal, right? Where it feels like you've made it. That's the upper echelon to get to, which you should expect given the way the league performed last season. Was a historic season. Going back to the start of the season through the end, they had the best non-conference. They put more teams in the tournament than anybody else has in history. Obviously, they had a representative in Florida win the national championship, 2 teams in the Final Four. The league is not going to be as strong as it was last season, and it's okay to say that and still say the league will be the best in the country. Last year was just such an outlier. There are so many good teams in that league. I don't know if we'll see the mass amount of great teams. I don't know if you're going to see, Auburn and Florida both on the one line. I don't know if you're going to see 2 1 seeds and the amount of, top 3 and top 4 seeds they got last year. I don't know if the top of the league is quite as strong, but there's going to be a lot of really good teams, and the bottom, again, is going to be incredibly, incredibly strong.
And I think that you bring up something interesting as well, in that obviously one of the biggest gripes of this past NCAA tournament is that it was so chalky. It's that we didn't have so many of the mid-majors. Do you think that that's just the way that it is here in this landscape with all these NIL collectives being, shall we say, a little bit more favorable to these power conference teams? Or do you think that the mid-majors can be able to rise back up once again? Because I do think that there are some mid-major programs that, for one, actually do have some guys that are sticking some good money into their programs. And for two, I think that these mid-major teams have been very crafty in the way that they've been able to spot some talent.
Oh, yeah. Mid-major teams are going to be a factor again. Just because we had a whole bunch of 1 seeds in the Final Four does not mean that this is the way that it is. Now, the bigger schools do have more NIL money, and they are going to be able to spend more because that's just the nature of the beast. But that's always been the case. That suddenly isn't changing now, which is all above board as opposed to below board. And now we know the large sums these guys are making. But you go back to the NCAA tournament too. Like, we had all 4 1 seeds. Is the conversation different if, Gonzaga hits a 3 on a possession and beats Houston in the second round, or, Florida doesn't erase a 10-point deficit in the last 3 minutes to beat Texas Tech? I think the conversation around everything and just the overall landscape in college basketball changes significantly if just a couple of things break one way as opposed to the other. And that's just the nature of the NCAA tournament. That's just the way things go. I think it was incredible that we got 4 1 seeds in the Final Four. It was obviously a historic, really great, really fun, really exciting, really well played Final Four. But that's not the way it's going to be moving forward. Certainly, I think it's going to be, their top teams will still be really good because they're really good. I expect us to get back to a more normal tournament outlook, particularly next year and probably the next couple of years too.
Yep, I agree with you. And I think that part of it is, as well as we do have Brain Rauf, who does such great work over at eCheck CBB, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, is because when I take a look at this day and age of college basketball, with regards to these mid-majors, obviously they're going to get more creative because you're not going to be able to bring in, a great Osborne from a season ago or anything like that. You don't have $2 million to bring in a guy. But what I love about these mid-major teams is looking down to the Division II ranks, and it feels like all those ads have been really good. Like we saw what Ben McCollum was obviously able to do at Drake. Now he's over at Iowa after 14 months ago. He was at the Division II level on a smaller scale. What these Big West teams have been able to do, like Andy Newman going on over to CSUN, Mike DeGeorge going on over to Cal Poly. I think that that's been a real game changer for some of these mid-majors because these D2, these D3 guys, they're used to just being out of flux. They're used to the roster turning over year after year, and bringing in these guys to what has been a changing landscape in Division I college basketball, I think has been very beneficial to these mid-major teams that have taken that chance.
They approach it right. That shouldn't be a shock. That's nothing new, but it's just the mid-major teams have to have a different approach than they have maybe 5 years ago. And the ones who are successful are the ones making that pivot.
Yep, absolutely. I do think that that is something that is so key to be taking a look at, because I do think that as well, it's a big reason why we saw the Big West be able to rise up as well, because we just saw a program that many years ago was in the Division II ranks at UC San Diego make the NCAA tournament. If they weren't so cold in the first few minutes in that game against Michigan, they legitimately win that game as well. And I feel like out of all the mid-majors out there, the Big West over the last few seasons has been that mid-major conference that's really been able to rise above all, and they've really been doing it right.
Yeah, they have the teams have capitalized on it, and some of that comes with, I think, too, the falling apart of the Pac-12. I know it's going to be resurrected, but for kids who want to, kids who want to stay at home or close to home, play close to home, there's now less options on the West Coast, right? Because you could go to USC, UCLA, but you're making trips to New Jersey to play Rutgers. You're taking trips to Maryland to play Maryland. You're taking all these long trips. You're not playing a lot of regionalized games. And so if you are debating between, do I go to like a Big West school, Mountain West school, and get a bigger role versus trying to, maybe carve something out or redshirt at a bigger program, you're seeing, I think, a lot of guys pick the route for the bigger role. We can talk all about, NIL money matters a lot, obviously. We're not going to tell you that it doesn't. But playing time still matters almost more than anything else for almost everybody. And so if you can offer playing time in a role and, a path to stardom, a path to get on NBA draft radars, that still matters a ton. And you're seeing a lot of schools in the Big West kind of take advantage of offering players that bigger role on the bigger stage.
And I think that you bring up something so interesting as well, and something that I want to ask you about. Do you think that in a strange way, mid-majors might be able to benefit from being able to get higher, shall we say, high-rated freshmen than we've seen in the past as well? Because obviously they're not going to hook the top 5, top 10 guys. Those are going to be still guys that they see immediate playing time. But with the way that things have been working in this day and age, a lot of these power conference teams, they're now looking at these guys that were averaging 15 points per game at the mid-major ranks. They're plucking them. And if you're a freshman, that's like a sort of a fringe 4-star guy. If you're a fringe 3-star guy, if you go to a power conference, you might not be seeing any playing time whatsoever, which will cause you to go down a level altogether. And I think that we're seeing more and more of these teams decide, you know what, we're going to go after that freshman that otherwise might be glued to the bench in a power conference team, whereas we can offer them a starting role right away.
Right, exactly. It's the flip side of several power conference coaches talking about how the way to win is through the portal right now, because they want to get old and stay old, and they're focusing most of their efforts on the portal. The flip side is there's a lot of really talented freshmen that are ending up at schools they normally 10 years ago probably wouldn't even be on their list. You look at the top 50 or top 100 list on 3 or 247 or what have you, there's a lot more A10 sprinkled in there than there was just a handful of years ago. There's a lot more Mountain West than there was a handful of years ago, right? There's a lot more of those kind of conferences sprinkled in for those higher rated freshmen because they're available, because a lot of the bigger schools are using more of their scholarship allotments for transfers.
Yeah, but I think that that's just so interesting to take a look at, and just sort of the paradigm shift that we're seeing in college basketball. It's Brian Rauf, who does a tremendous job over at He Checks CBB. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and we touched briefly upon some of these coaches coming up from the D2 ranks, and I certainly do think that there have been some great hires here in the process. Obviously, I mentioned one with Ben McCollum. I thought that that was an A-plus hire for Iowa, and I have not seen a single person that has said that that was a bad hire, and if you do, I don't know what to tell you. But that said, what are a few other moves that you've seen here in the offseason with regards to coaching changes that you just take a look at and you just really like the program and you really like the direction that that coach is going to have them going in?
I think the Big Ten in general made a lot of good, smart hires this season, right? Indiana getting Darian DeVries, I think, was really big. They kind of shunned the name, shunned all the Indiana connections, just went and hired a good, proven basketball coach, right? Which is something I think Indiana needed to do. Minnesota bringing Nico Medved over from Colorado State, he's an alum, was an easy choice, but a smart one. And Colorado State hiring Ali Faroukmanesh's assistant, Nico Medved's old assistant, to be his replacement at Colorado State, I think is a really good one too. There are a lot of good ones across the country. I think Maryland ending up with Buzz Williams after Kevin Willard left is maybe about equal for Maryland, if not something of an upgrade. I know Williams is not one to stick around one place for more than 5 or 6 years, but in those 5 or 6 years, everywhere he's been, he's won at a pretty high level, and I think can boost Maryland's stock there. So a lot of good hires across the country, but I think the Big Ten in particular and the schools who are looking for new coaches in the Big Ten all did pretty well for themselves.
Yep, I agree with you on the Big Ten, and I'm so glad that you brought up what Colorado State was able to do with Ali Faroukmanesh, because I thought that the Mountain West were some big winners as well. I'm not sure what you think about UNLV right now, but I feel like Josh Pastner deserved a little bit more love than what he got over at Memphis, because it felt like just folks over there in Memphis, they didn't love him to say the least, and I think that we're seeing what we're seeing now, and they have a little bit more appreciation for him. But I look at the way that UNLV has been able to approach the transfer portal ever since Pastner has been able to come in there. Obviously, with him working in the media the last few years, he very much knows the landscape of college basketball. And I thought that that was really a hire that went a little bit further under the radar than it deserved. And I think that UNLV finally has that coach that they truly need.
I think it's a step in the right direction. Now, I've been surprised with how well he's done in the portal so far. This was a hire that I didn't view it as an odd fit for me, right? But he's used the resources UNLV does have and the appeal of UNLV to land a really well-regarded transfer class. You go back to his time at Memphis, he, I think, fell victim to being the guy to follow Calipari at Memphis. He was good, but wasn't great. Gets the Georgia Tech job, and Georgia Tech was supposed to be a complete rebuild when he got it, and had them very competitive much earlier than expected. Won an ACC tournament there. I also think became a victim of his early success because that sort of reset expectations for later in his tenure, ended up hurting him there. I think he'll do, at the very least, a solid job at UNLV. I'm interested to see what the upside ends up being while he's there with the Rebels. But what he's done with his first transfer class, is nothing but positive signs so far.
Yep, right there with you. I've been very impressed, and I did not think that he was going to do this in the transfer portal either. So
no.
That has certainly been something that has been jumping out to me, and that has been one of the more surprising teams in the transfer portal. Were a few others that you take a look at and you feel like they've done a little bit better than you expected in the portal, because the one that really jumps out to me, High Point, it feels like, has two of everything right now. I recognize that they've got some deep pockets, but they lose their coach in the offseason, and somehow, some way, it feels like they've got two good guards coming in. They've got two great small forwards, two great power forwards, and that's been a team that I've been very impressed by here in the offseason, too.
Yeah, they've done a great job. The one that has really flown under the radar to me, kind of going back to the SEC, is Oklahoma. Oklahoma, I think, after Jeremiah Fears, left to go pro, I was kind of looking at this season as being like, okay, what are they going to do? What is Porter Moser going to do? Is this potentially like his last season in charge there? Because there were iffy vibes going into this past season with how he had been doing at Oklahoma and the fact the roster didn't seem great. And then he hits on Fears becoming a superstar, like a top 10 NBA draft pick, right? And so you figure, Lightning can't really strike twice with that. But he goes out and he's able to get Xavier Brown from St. Joe's. He's able to get Darion Reed from Alabama. He's able to get a handful of guys that are basically going to make his starting lineup, and they're all high-quality caliber players who fit the system that Porter Moser wants to play. I don't know if Oklahoma is going to compete at the top of the SEC, but this was a program that I think, with what they lost, was in danger of being the worst team in the SEC. And now I think they're on track to finish in the top half and be a top 25 caliber team.
Yep, I agree with you. I do think that they were able to take some strides in the right direction. I love what Oklahoma was able to do. And how do you take a look at Texas this offseason as well? Because I thought that the Sean Miller hire was pretty rock solid. And for Texas, I'm sure that they aren't quite done in the transfer portal. I think that they've got other guys to bring in. But they've got a few guys I feel like went a little bit under the radar, bringing in Simeon Bolcher, bringing in Camden Heide, who were guys that were on the bench at their respective schools that I think could be able to extend in this sort of a style and in this sort of a just sort of offense.
They're going to have better roles than what they had at their other places, roles that they wanted. It seems to be they're on track for both of those, which will be good. And it gives Sean Miller, some veteran presences on that team, because they do get Tremont Mark back, you need to get Jordan Pope back, but the rest of that rotation needed some rounding out. And so you bring in talented guys who have some potential, untapped potential, some untapped upside to fill out your rotation there in your first season to kind of help build a culture and give you a base to build off of. I think is a smart thing. I don't know what this team's upside is going to be, but Sean Miller, his floor is always really, really high, and the Texas team to me has the same. It has a really, really high floor.
Absolutely. And how about if we hit on one other SEC team with you, because I know that you're a man from the great state of South Carolina. I know that you went to school there. I feel like under the radar, they've had a really nice offseason. Now, I don't think that they're going to be competing for the top three of the SEC or anything like that, but how do you evaluate things? Because I think that Mongolian Mike is just a Swiss Army knife guy that can do a little bit of everything. And Michi Johnson, I think, is realizing for the second time that going from Ohio State to South Carolina is probably going to be a really good move for him.
Yeah, I think he realized 5 or 6 games in the season that he made a mistake leaving South Carolina. It'll be interesting to see, because when South Carolina was successful 2 seasons ago now, they were a team that played a more methodical style, but very efficient, shot the three really well, and had some versatile big men that gave teams problems, right? Colin Murray-Boyles was the one who's going to be a lottery pick, going to be a first-round pick, but B.J. Mack caused a lot of problems as well with what he could do as an inside-out threat. That interior presence isn't quite there, so I'm interested to see how that goes. But they've upgraded on the perimeter, certainly. On the perimeter, this group looks like a better version of that team that did really well 2 years ago. We'll see if they're able to be consistent and kind of recapture that magic, because there was a little bit of everything breaking their way or breaking the right way that season. If they can get some good play, from the 5 spot, from the front court, then this South Carolina team can be one that surprises for sure.
I agree with you. And a man that always surprises with the way that he just delivers time and time again. Absolutely tremendous insights in college basketball. That would be you, Brian. You do a tremendous job already at Check CBB. I know that all of you guys are very hard at work taking a look at what we're going to be getting this next college basketball season. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and now people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at brauf33, BRAUF33. at hecheckcbb.com. I got a lot coming on with the transfer portal, and also looking ahead to some NBA draft stuff as well, because that's coming up here in a month and a half. Still be a lot of coverage on both of those things, recapping the transfer portal, resetting rosters, and kind of a look ahead for next season on hecheckcbb.com.
And there's plenty of guys that are going to be going through the NBA draft process that are also in the transfer portal as well, and that's going to lead to some big-time guys being out there in the month of May/early June that are going to be looking for a home as well. And Brian, he does such a great job gauging this tremendous game of college basketball. So big thanks, Brian, for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming next, I do give you a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Wednesday.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. it is always great to be joined by Brain Rauf, who does such great work over at HeCheckCBB, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today, so big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours, and when it comes to what we've all gotten in the transfer portal, still north of 2,400 players have entered, and you've right now got Ian Shefflin trying to play apparently as a tight end on the Clemson football team. Now, I don't know if he's going to try to perhaps look at his other options with regards to college basketball, but that one I found to be very interesting. When we hear more about that, I will give you guys more notice there, but I thought that one was very strange, and you know what, that's where we're at in college basketball right now. So some good, clean family fun. You did see JoJo Moore look to give more to Tulane, as last season he was over at Oral Roberts, and he was solid over at Oral Roberts last season. Granted, it was an Oral Roberts team that played absolutely no defense whatsoever, but as a true freshman, he was able to throw in there just under 11 points per contest. He threw in there a little bit over 4 boards, 2.5 assists per game. He's not going to be like some guy that lights you up at north of 40% from 3-point range or anything like that, but he's able to give you about a mid-30s 3-point shooting percentage at 6'5", so I think that he's going to be a solid fit for Tulane, and this is a Tulane squad that I think the biggest thing for them, and I've said it the last few seasons, I'm going to say it once again, for the love of Pete, let's have a little bit of depth here, because they've went with pretty much a 5-man rotation and absolutely nothing else last few seasons. It has not worked out very well for them, to say the least, so I do think that they're going to need to have a little bit more there, and they're taking strides in the right direction. Being able to bring in Curtis Williams Jr. along Scotty Middleton on over from the Big East is large, and Davion Bradford, 7-footer from ETSU, that should be able to help them out, but I do feel like they're going to need a few more pieces to be able to achieve that. You've got Anton Bonke, hopefully I said that correct. He was over at Providence this last season, just wasn't able to get out there on the floor, but he stands 7'2", and this is a guy that was a pretty highly touted junior college guy from Eastern Arizona College. He has decided that he is going to be going to Charlotte, and this is large for a Charlotte team that was one of the worst rebounding teams in all of college basketball last season. For Charlotte, they've had a bit of a sticky spot with losing so many guys in the transfer portal over the last few seasons that they do need just a little bit of positivity in general, and Charlotte over the last, we're going to call it about 72 or so hours, they have been able to stack a few guys. They were able to revamp that backcourt as well, so I think that this is going to be massive for them, and for Charlotte this upcoming season, they are going to be able to have Desing Mingo out there. They've really been attacking things with regards to their low post play, as they also brought in their Kulal Mading, who was over at Norfolk State this last season. This is certainly the biggest transfer that they've had figuratively and literally, so we'll see what else they have up their sleeve. Jalen Curry, he was over at UMass this last season. He has decided that he is going to be going to Oklahoma State. Guy that left something to be desired in his 3-point shooting, but 4 assists, 13.5 points per game. And for Oklahoma State, they had quite a few guys that did leave something to be desired with that 3-point shooting a season ago. Steve Lutz, I think, is doing a solid job over here at Oklahoma State. Again, I do think that they're going to need to get a little bit more shooting in there. They bring in Isaiah Coleman from Seton Hall, who's a little bit of a do-it-all player, and Christian Coleman, he comes over from UAB as well. Parsons Law is relatively rock solid down low, so they were able to do a nice job of addressing that and bringing in Anthony Roy, who prior to him being out for the season with UW Green Bay, he was actually leading all of college basketball in scoring. I think that Oklahoma State has stacked some nice pieces together. They just need that designated shooter, though, because that's the one thing that I take a look at with this roster, and I do wonder what they're going to be able to get out of that. I do know that this team is going to be able to get a lot out of this man. As Alabama, they're bringing in Katen Bristow. He was over at Tarleton State this last season. This should be able to help out their defense, as Bristow, he was able to give the team a little bit over 11 points per contest. Now, is he going to be coming in there, and is he going to be starting right away for Alabama? No, but I mean, this is a guy that stands 6'8". He should be able to give them a few nice minutes, and with the way that Alabama plays super duper up tempo, they need to bring in there a lot of fresh bodies. So I mean, I think that he's going to be a guy that comes in off the bench for the first few seasons, and we've seen it with guys like Mark Sears. When they go from the mid-major ranks and they stick with this program, they're able to command some minutes. And for Bristow, he was able to shoot about 33% from 3-point range as well. With Alabama, they're going to be bringing back a few guys from last season as well, so it's not like the cupboard was completely bare for them by the transfer portal. Now, with regards to Alabama and the transfers that they have brought in, I do feel like they've been able to do a relatively solid job on that front, as well as Bristow obviously is the latest of them, but I mean, they've done a nice job of being able to add a little bit of size, as well as you've got a guy in Taylor Bolbowen who's going to be coming on over from Florida State. Jaleel Bethea was a very highly touted freshman a few seasons ago. He comes in from Miami as well, so I do think that there's some talent there. Noah Williamson, the 7-footer from Bucknell, that's able to pop it from 3-point range. I do think that he's going to be able to help them out out as well. And you take a look at this guy, and he's going to be able to be pretty rock solid in my opinion, as well as you've also got Lewis Lesman transferring, and he's going to be going on over to Fordham. Last season with the Crimson of Harvard, he was able to land about 8 points, 3 boards. Has always been a rock solid three-point shooter, not necessarily amazing, and I remember 2 seasons ago was more of a 38% three-point shooter. It does feel like Fordham is getting in the right direction. Mike Magpayo is a really good hire for them, and I do think that he's going to get things turned around sooner rather than later. Now, we said that about Fordham quite a bit, and for this Fordham program, they just have not been able to outrun the fact that they don't necessarily have the world's greatest facilities. This is not a school that has a ton of NIL or anything like that, but bringing in Akira Jacobs from Hawaii was relatively solid. Jace Howard from Michigan, I do like that move as well. And Desjure Reeves, who is a nice go-to scorer over at Iona and Northern Colorado, I really do think that Mike Magpayo is doing it relatively correctly, not bringing over a ton of his guys from UC Riverside. That said, I do think that he's building something strong out there, and I think that this is a pretty strong transfer as well. Lamont Sabli, he was over at Incarnate Word last season. He was able to be rock solid down low, give the team about 3.5 boards, 4 points per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Iona. I do like what Iona has been able to do over the last, we're going to call it about week or so. They got a little bit of slow start in the transfer portal. I think much of that is because you're bringing in an NBA guy, but CJ Anthony was over at Cincinnati, comes in. Chase Comer was a relatively rock solid shooter over at Wofford. He's going to be coming in as well. Matt Reed should be able to team up with Sabali down low, so I think that these guys are going to form a nice duo, and I think that this team is going to be right back towards the top of the Metro Atlantic once again. Po' Boy King, he was very good over at NC Central this past season. 16.5 points per contest, mid-30s three-point shooter. He has decided that he is going to be going to Sam Houston State. Sam Houston State's problem last year was not scoring. It was all about the defensive side of things, but being able to add a guy like this who was able to generate quite a few steals, I think that's going to be able to help out their defense. It's not a team that's done a ton of yards in the transfer portal. They're also bringing in Isaiah Manning, guy that was on the bench, but it was a solid forward for TCU, and Justin Begg, who was a gentleman over at George Mason this last season who wasn't able to get out there, but is a guy that's able to handle the ball. I do think that Sam Houston State making some good contributions. They're going to have to operate without Lamar Wilkerson anymore. That said, I do think that things are going in the right direction for them. I do think that this school is going in the right direction as well, as you've got Jalen Bedford, who's going to be going from UNLV on over to Virginia Tech. Began his career at Oral Roberts, and this past season shot about 35.5% from 3, 10 points per contest for Virginia Tech. This team has always left something to be desired defensively. Even when things were really rocking and rolling for them, they always were a little bit of a weaker defensive team, but they've always been a team that's been pretty solid with regards to their offense. Bringing in Bedford should be able to help out with that, as you've already got for Virginia Tech Isaiah Pashaf, who is relatively solid over at Delaware. He was a 6'4", relatively nice three-point shooter coming in, and Amani Hansberry from the other Virginia, West Virginia, coming in as well. So I do think that they've done a pretty good job here, and they do have a few guys that they're able to build around that are going to be staying with the program. Javon Ruffin, he 2 seasons ago was really good for Colorado. These past 2 years, it's been a little bit more rough. I should say the 2022-23 season, he was good. Last 2 seasons were relatively rough, but this past season was able to average about 5.5 points per contest. He's decided that he's going to be going to Bowling Green. Now, for Javon Ruffin, a little bit of a one-trick pony guy. He shoots it relatively well from three-point range, and that's how you're really not going to get a whole bunch of production off him. And by that, I mean, you take a look at that 2022-23 campaign, shot about 35% from three-point range. It tipped him more around about 31% from 3 this season, but that said, I do think that this is a good pickup for Bowling Green. They're going to need to have a few guys that are able to generate some turnovers, what have you, be able to lend a little bit of support, but if you're looking for a guy that could be a shooting dynamo out there in the MAC, I think that he can certainly be that. I think that this guy is going to be of impact as well. Ogana Onyesu, I mean, I remember when he was one of the more highly touted big men out there in the transfer portal. Last season was just a flopperoonie at Kansas State. He averaged about 2.5 points, 2.5 boards, and a block per contest. He's decided that he is going to be going to Virginia. A very good get for Virginia. When he was at his full force over at Kentucky, he was averaging more like 2.5 blocks per contest. Not a guy that's going to be like amazing with regards to shooting or anything like that, but you know what? This team needed something down low. They brought in some nice dynamo scorers like Adalyn Hall, who was over at BYU, to be able to outrun the offense. You've got Chakari White, who was over at North Dakota State. Devin Tillis, who's a nice versatile piece from UC Irvine. I think that Virginia is really starting to be able to get into the 21st century, be able to take some strides forward, and I do like that move. You've got Karan Davis, who was okay when he was over at Louisiana this last year. 8.5 points. He was limited due to injury. He only appeared in 7 games this last season. He has decided that he is going to go to Alabama A&M. For Alabama A&M, this is a absolutely tremendous gift for them. They have not picked up much here in the transfer portal. A school like Alabama A&M, they just don't have the resources to be able to bring in too much whatsoever, but bringing in a guy like a Karan Davis who was shooting in the mid-30s from three-point range at 6'6" when he went down with injury, this is a very good gift for them, and for Alabama A&M, they're going to be looking to be just a little bit more competitive here moving forward. You've got Pablo Tamba, who last season was over at UC Davis at 6'7". He was relatively solid, 11.5 points, 5.5 boards per contest. He has decided that he's going to LSU. Now, if LSU is playing Tamba for a bunch of minutes, you know that this is a lost season for LSU. But that said, you know what? I do think that he's going to be able to go in there. He's going to be able to do a nice job of being able to give this team perhaps a few minutes off the bench. You've also got Rashad King, who's coming on over from Northeastern. Max McKinnon comes in for Portland. And again, if you've got Mr. Max McKinnon playing serious minutes for the team, that's tough. But Deaton Thomas, who was over at UNLV this last season, he was a nice go-to scorer, so I really do like what they're building over there at LSU. This should be a depth piece, and if it's anything more than a depth piece, that's a little bit of an issue, but still a relatively solid depth piece. Then I was talking about Davion Bradford heading on over to Tulane as well, as they had themselves a big minute guy that actually began his career over at Kansas State. It's just never been able to find his footing anywhere, but I said I do think that things are heading in the right direction for them, and things are very much heading in the right direction for Sacramento State, as you've got Mr. Chadu Dorama. Hopefully I said that correct. He was over at Arkansas State this last year. 5.5 points per contest, 6'10" big man that as a freshman was able to have a little bit of an impact. He's going on over to Sacramento State, clearly having Shaquille O'Neal as the general manager for this team has been paying off in spades, as for Sacramento State over the last 48 or so hours, they're starting to use those NIL funds. They're starting to really be able to make some headway as they're bringing in Jeremiah Cherry, a big man from UNLV. Obviously, Shaquille O'Neal is coming in there. Mikey Williams, he's a guy that was very rock solid at the junior college ranks about 2 years ago. I really like what Sacramento State is building in the last 48 or so hours. Has been great for them. And this, I do believe, is a rock-solid pickup as well, as Robert Don't Call Him Bobby Morris picking up Caleb Brown. Brown began his career over at Missouri. He didn't necessarily see a lot of playing time there, and he was on Cal State Fullerton's roster last year, and Cal State Fullerton was very, very rough to say the least, but I mean, if there was one guy that was actually giving you a halfway decent effort, it was Brown. He was able to log for the team about 6 points, 3 boards. His 1.7 assists per game sadly led the team, so that was a little bit less than tremendous for them. A guy that at 6'6" has a little bit of versatility. I think that he's going to be able to be a bit of an impact player for Robert Morris. Again, I recognize that he's coming from a Cal State Fullerton team that was awful last season, but for Robert Morris, they are going to need to replace a lot of the guys that were so good for them last year. Alvaro Fergarius and guys like this. Nicolas Chidakudis, who comes on over from North Carolina A&T, should be able to give this team a little bit of rebounding. They have some work to do out there in the backcourt, but I do like the way that things are starting to materialize for them, and things are very much materializing with these rosters, and I am following it all right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters M. The name does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Brain Rauf, who does such great work over at Check CBB, for joining me in the last segment. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.